matters. News at 6:30 and 10 p.m. And bringing you the best in local entertainment.
Cordials WSST, because local matters.
The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class, and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor, president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Mrs. Thelma Green, age 103, of Americus, Georgia. The family of Deacon S. Vola May Bryant Walker of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Miss Geraldine G. Jones of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deacon S. Pearlie Merritt Shelton of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Rosa May Atkins Stokes of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Doris Ruth Dice Tyson of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Susie May Morris Curry of Oakfield, Georgia. The family of Lieutenant Stokely Carmichael Cheese of Perry, Georgia, and Rochelle, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mother Thelma Green, age 103, 109 Carter Street, Americus, Georgia, died Monday, November 23rd, at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Thelma Green, age 103, was held Sunday, December 6th, graveside at the Eastview Cemetery in Americus, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Jermaine Harris, pastor of the Allen Chapel AME Church, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted daughters, Mrs. Martha Anderson of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Florence Franklin and her husband, Mr. Frank Franklin of Vero Beach, Florida. Her devoted grandchildren, Miss Pamela Turner Coates and Miss Sonia Turner Thompson, both of Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Melvin Turner of New Jersey, Mr. Cecil Franklin, Miss Diana Crawley, Miss Vicki Franklin, and Miss Phyllis Franklin, all of Vero Beach, Florida. Her loving and supported nieces and nephews, Mrs. Bobby Andrews and her husband, Deacon William Andrews, Dr. Shirley Green Reese, and Mr. Jimmy Green, all of Americus, Georgia. Dr. Gregory Green of Warner Robins, Georgia, and Mrs. May Harris and Miss Louise Harris, both of Atlanta, Georgia. Miss Jamin Davis, Miss Abby Gail Davis, both of Atlanta, Georgia. Miss Tina Davis of Americus, Georgia. Miss Edith Green, Miss Alice Green, and Miss Deborah Green, all of Americus, Georgia. A host of great nieces and great nephews, 11 cousins, and many supportive friends, to include her devoted pastor, Reverend Jermaine Harris, and the members of the Allen Chapel AME Church of Americus, Georgia, and a host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mother Thelma Green, age 103, 109 Carter Street, Americus, Georgia. Deacon S. Vola May Bryant Walker, age 97, of 1104 North 10th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, December 2nd, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon S. Vola May Bryant Walker, age 97, was held Sunday, December 6, graveside at the Pleasant Hill Baptist Church Cemetery, Hatley Community, Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Chester L. Askin officiated. Survivors include 11 and devoted children, Mrs. Evelyn Bryant Crapp of Carrington, Georgia, Mr. Troy Lee Walker of Orlando, Florida, Miss Tony Walker Nance, Miss Jackie Dennis Walker, and Miss Jacqueline Denise Walker, all of Cordele, Georgia. A host of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, to include a devoted grandchild, Mr. Jackie D. Nance and Mrs. Vola Y. Nance, both of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Barbara Montgomery of Carrollton, Georgia, and Miss Shelley C. Walker of Orlando, Florida. Two sisters-in-law, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Deacon S. Vola May Bryant Walker, age 97, of 1104 North 10th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Miss Geraldine Janetta Jones, age 53, of 1625 Rainbow Drive, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, December 3rd, of injuries sustained in an automobile accident. The funeral service for Miss Geraldine Janetta Jones, age 53, was held Monday, December 7th, graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Pastor Apostle Lily Weaver, pastor of the New Light International Ministry, officiated. Survivors include 11 and devoted children, Miss Maya K. Gray of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Tanita M. Gray and her companion, Mr. Trevian Finley of Killeen, Texas, Mr. Grenada R. Jones, Mr. Ray Cedric G. Jones, Miss Menica L. Jones, Mr. Kevin L. Jones, Miss Jaquisha T. Williams, all of Cordele, Georgia. 20 beloved grandchildren. Her beloved father, Mr. Charles B. Smith, and his wife, Mrs. Vicky Smith of Pahokee, Florida. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Cedric V. Jones, Mr. Keaton J. Felton, Mr. Corey J. Coley, all of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved sisters, Miss Oakley Smith, Miss Charmaine Smith, both of Pahokee, Florida, Miss LaBertha Smith of Tallahassee, Florida. Her beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Christine Gaines and her husband, Mr. Jesse Gaines, Mr. Lester Jones Jr., both of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Joe C. Jones and his wife, Mrs. Jackie Jones of San Antonio, Texas, Miss Ruby Jones, Miss Ann Rouse and her husband, Mr. Alvin Rouse, Miss Janetta Jones, Miss Gloria Jones, Miss Shirley Green, and Miss Ruth Smith, all of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Tony Jones and his wife, Mrs. Trixie Jones of Atlanta, Georgia, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins to include her special cousins, Miss Chandra White of Crestview, Florida, Mr. Keisha Jones of Cordele, Georgia, a host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends to include Miss Makisha Brown and Miss Lisa Hamilton, both of Cordele, Georgia, survived. Miss Grenetta Jones, Gerlin Janetta Jones, age 53, of 1625 Rainbow Drive, Cordele, Georgia. Deacon S. Pearlie Merritt Shelton, age 87, of 103 Burton Circle, Americus, Georgia, died Wednesday, December 2nd at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Deaconess Pearlie Merritt Shelton, age 87, was held Wednesday, December 9th, graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. The Reverend Willie E. Green, pastor of the Forest Chapel Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Deacon Ezel Shelton Jr. of Americus, Georgia. Her loving and devoted children, Miss Betty Shelton of Americus, Georgia, Miss Peggy Shelton and Miss Bernice Allen, both of Decatur, Georgia. Miss Dolores Strozer and her husband, Mr. Ernest Strozer of Rex, Georgia. Miss Laura Shelton of Hampton, Georgia, Mrs. Deborah Williams and her husband, Mr. George Williams, Mr. Ezel Shelton and his wife, Mrs. Carla Shelton of Louisiana, Mr. Rodney Shelton and his wife, Mrs. Trista Shelton of Americus, Georgia, and Mr. Michael Chilton, a host of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, a beloved brother, Mr. James Merritt, and his wife, Mrs. Frances Merritt of Plains, Georgia, 7 sisters-in-law, 1 brother-in-law, a host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survived. Deaconess Pearlie Merritt Shelton, age 87, 103 Burton Circle, Americus, Georgia. Miss Rosa May Atkins Stokes, age 70, of 380 Fish Hatchery Road, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, December 2nd, at her residence in Cordele, Georgia. Funeral service for Ms. Rosa May Atkins Stokes was held Thursday, December 10th, graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Gregory Williams, pastor of the Emmanuel Baptist Church, officiating. Survivors include her loving and devoted son, Mr. Lawrence Stokes, and his wife, Mrs. Wanda Stokes of Hampton, Georgia. Mr. James Smith and his wife, Mrs. Sierra Smith of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving grandchildren, Miss Brittany N. Stokes of Atlanta, Georgia. Miss Marissa K. Stokes of Warner Robins, Georgia. Mr. Rashad Hill of Arizona. Miss Brianna Stokes of Kansas. Mr. Jamal Smith, Mrs. Jamara Smith, and Mrs. Janaya Smith, all of Panama City, Florida. Mrs. Tahara Bryant, Mrs. Wyatt Byron, Kashard Sneed, Jaira Fulks, T.J. Byram, all of Hampton, Georgia. 3 great-grandchildren, her beloved and devoted sisters, Mrs. Johnny Butler and her husband, Mr. Earl Butler, of Riverdale, Georgia. Miss Ruby D. Atkins and her husband, Mr. Rufus Atkins. Mrs. Mary E. Royal and her husband, Mr. Buford Royal, all of Cordele, Georgia. Miss Antonetta Hurley and her husband, Mr. Willie Hurley, of Albany, Georgia. Mrs. Brenda Martin and her husband, Mr. James Martin, of Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Maquita Green of Conley, Georgia. Miss Catherine Massey of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mrs. Geraldine Putman and her husband, Mr. Charles Putman of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Charles Atkins and his wife, Mrs. Judy Atkins of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. John H. Atkins and his wife, Mrs. Gwendolyn Atkins of Riverdale, Georgia, and Mr. Ricky D. Atkins and his wife, Mrs. Shaquilla Atkins of Texas. Her beloved uncle, Mr. Anthony Wade, and his wife, Mrs. Ann Wade of Albany, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include a special friend, Mr. Viotis Tukes, and a close friend, Mr. Lawrence Stokes Sr., survived Mrs. Rosa May Atkins Stokes, age 70, of 380 Fish Hatchery Road, Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Doris Ruth Dice Tyson, age 69, of 145 Stonewall Drive, Americus, Georgia, died Thursday, December 3rd, at her residence in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Doris Ruth Dice Tyson, age 69, was held Friday, December 11th, graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend David Ham, pastor of the Perry Grove Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted daughter, Miss Cassandra Jordan, her loving grandchildren, Miss Delisa Slappy, Mr. Derek Slappy Jr., Miss Jessica Jordan, and Miss Shalise Dice, her great-grandchildren, Kendall, Kinsley, Kason, Kylie, and Corey. A beloved brother, Mr. Jimmy Lee Floyd. Her beloved aunt, Mrs. Bobby Player of Miami, Florida. A beloved niece and nephew, Miss LaShonda Floyd and Mr. Otis Floyd. Her godchildren, Miss Jaden Yarbrough, Miss Mache Yarbrough, and Miss Yasmin Yarbrough. A host of other relatives and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Doris Ruth Dice Tyson, age 69, of 145 Stonewall Drive, Americus, Georgia. Mother Susie Mae Morris Curry, age 89, beloved church mother of the Zion Grove Baptist Church of Oakfield, Georgia, of 319 Railroad Street, Oakfield, Georgia, died Saturday, December 5th at her residence in Oakfield, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Susie Mae Morris Curry, age 89, beloved church mother of the Zion Grove Baptist Church of Oakfield, Georgia, was held Saturday, December 12th at the Mount Zion Cemetery in Oakfield, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Tiller Sims, pastor of the Zion Grove Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mrs. Dorothy Jean Bird and her husband, Mr. Bonnie Bird, Mr. Edward Charles Curry, both of Oakfield, Georgia, Mrs. Gwendolyn Hoskin of Leesburg, Georgia, Mrs. Gloria Gant and her husband, the Reverend Eddie Gant of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Ricky Lewis Curry of Oakfield, Georgia, Mr. Nathaniel Curry, his wife, Mrs. Audrey Curry of Warwick, Georgia, Mrs. Cassandra Evans and her husband, Mr. Broderick Evans of Sylvester, Georgia, Mr. Wayne Curry and his wife, Mrs. Michelle Curry of Warwick, Georgia, Mr. Michael Curry and his wife, Mrs. Angie Curry of Oakfield, Georgia, and Mr. Edward J. Curry of Lee County, Georgia. A host of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, her beloved and devoted brothers, Mr. Callaway Morris Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Janie Morris of Ashburn, Georgia, Mr. Johnny Lee Morris of Tampa, Florida, and Deacon Charlie Will Morris and his wife, Mrs. Bonnie Morris of Albany, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mother Susie Mae Morris Curry, age 89, of 319 Railroad Street, Oakfield, Georgia, beloved church mother of the Zion Grove Baptist Church of Oakfield, Georgia. Lieutenant Stokely Carmichael Cheese, age 44, of 211 Longbridge Way, Perry, Georgia, died Sunday, December 6th at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for Lieutenant Stokely Carmichael Cheese, age 44, was held Saturday, December 12th, graveside at the Pine City Baptist Church Cemetery in Rochelle, Georgia. His pastor, Bishop James L. Smith Sr., officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Felicia Kendrick Cheese of Perry, Georgia. His loving and caring parents, Mr. Ronnie and Mrs. Mary Cheese of Pitts, Georgia. His loving sister, Mrs. Sharonda Bryant, and her husband, Byron, and her husband, Mr. Antonio Byron Sr. of Cordell, Georgia. His beloved brother, Mr. Rodney Cheese of Pitts, Georgia. His beloved grandmother, Mother Pauline Trotman of Rochelle, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mr. Richard Trotman and his wife, Mrs. Mary Trotman, and Mrs. Connie McAdoo and her husband, Mr. Hollis McAdoo of Pitts, Georgia. Mrs. Lolita Freeman and her husband, Mr. Frank Freeman of Seville, Georgia. Mr. Charles Trotman, Mr. Jimmy Miller and his wife, Mrs. Friendly Miller, Mrs. Evelyn Cheese, Mr. Joseph Miller, Mr. William Griffin and his wife, Mrs. Melinda Griffin, Miss Diana Griffin, and Mr. David Miller, all of Rochelle, Georgia. Mr. Charles Griffin of Fitzgerald, Georgia. His brothers-in-law, Mr. Tyrone Milner of Augusta, Georgia, Mr. J.B. Crowder and his wife, Mrs. Tangela Crowder of Pineview, Georgia, and Mr. Patrick Milner and his wife, Mrs. Maddie Milner of Hawkinsville, Georgia. His beloved nieces and nephews, Michael, Richard, Antoine, Emmanuel, Kayla, and Antonio Jr. A host of cousins to include his special cousin, Mr. Jerome Trotman of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Ricky Trotman of Ashburn, Georgia, Mr. Bernard Bailey of Valdosta, Georgia, Mr. Nathaniel Freeman of Fort Mitchell, Alabama, and Miss Tanya Jackson of Warner Robins, Georgia. A host of other relatives and friends to include a special friend, Mr. Anthony Eagleton of Kathleen, Georgia. Survived Lieutenant Stokely Carmichael Cheese, age 44, of 211 Lone Bridge Way, Perry, Georgia. Again, the family of Mother Thelma Green, age 103, of Americus, Georgia. The family of Deaconess Vola Mae Bryant Walker of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Geraldine G. Jones of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deaconess Pearlie Mary Shelton of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Rosa Mae Atkins Stokes of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Doris Ruth Dice Tyson of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Susie Mae Morris Curry of Oakfield, Georgia, beloved church mother of the Zion Grove Baptist Church of Oakfield, Georgia. The family of Lieutenant Stokely Carmichael Cheese of Perry, Georgia, and Rochelle, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during the hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you, is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Diana were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Stanley Jefferson, age 65, of 1555 Northwest 7th Avenue, Miami, Florida, died Thursday, November 26th at his residence in Miami, Florida. Survivors include his beloved son, Mr. Terrence Jefferson of Mississippi, his loving and devoted mother, Mother Willie Bell Jefferson of Vienna, Georgia, his beloved brothers, Mr. Johnny Jefferson and Mr. Eugene Jefferson, and his wife, Mrs. Barbara Jefferson, both of Miami, Florida, a god sister, Miss Teresa Williams of Miami, Florida, a host of aunts and uncles, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Stanley Jefferson, age 65, of 1555 Northwest 7th Avenue, Miami, Florida. The funeral service for Mr. Stanley Jefferson, age 65, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Rodriguez Lamar Collins, age 33, of 716 Burton Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, December 4th in Salina, Kansas. Survivors include his loving, devoted daughter, Miss Michael Owens of Vienna, Georgia, his loving and devoted sister, Miss Gloria Collins, and her husband, Mr. Dwayne Smith of Saline, Kansas, a beloved brother, Mr. Daniel Collins of Vienna, Georgia, a host of aunts, uncles, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include a devoted friend, Miss Michael Owens of Vienna, Georgia, survived Mr. Rodriguez Lamar Collins, age 33, of 716 Burton Street, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Rodriguez Lamar Collins, age 33, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Beloved, renowned gospel soloist, musician, songwriter, Brother Jike King, age 59, of 619 West 26th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, December 11th, at the Westwood Healthcare Rehabilitation Center in Statesboro, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted sisters, Ms. Ruby Taylor of Cordele, Georgia, and Mrs. Eddie Ruth Burgess and her husband, Mr. Sonny Burgess of Ashburn, Georgia. A beloved uncle, Mr. Sam Roundtree of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved nieces, Miss Felicia Taylor, Miss Mika Taylor, both of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Sonia King of Savannah, Georgia. His great niece, Miss Makayla Battle of Cordele, Georgia. A godson, Mr. Courtney Reese of Cordele, Georgia. A host of other relatives, to include two devoted cousins, Mr. Leon Roundtree of Douglas, Georgia, and Mr. Jerome Clark of Cordele, Georgia, survives beloved, renowned gospel soloist, musician, and songwriter, Brother Jack King, age 59, of 619 West 26th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for beloved, renowned gospel soloist, musician, songwriter, Brother Jack King, age 59, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. Mr. Chester King, age 63, of 806 South 5th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, December 11th, at the Phoebe Putnam Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mr. Termicra J. Ming of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. McKevius J. Ming of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Jessica King of Warner Robins, Georgia, Mr. Chester King Jr., Mr. Raphael Wilson, Miss Brittany Wilson, Mrs. Jacque Coney, and Mr. Roderick Montfrey, all of Cordele, Georgia. 42 beloved grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren, his loving and devoted mother, Mother Dorothy Lee Shorter King of Cordele, Georgia. His caring siblings, Ms. Dorothy Jean King of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Charles James King Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Deborah King of Perry, Georgia, Mr. Randy King and his wife, Mrs. Martha King of Riverdale, Georgia, Minister Joyce Ann Daniels and her husband, Mrs. J. Willie Daniels of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Jerome King and his wife, Mrs. Brenda King of Las Vegas, Nevada, Minister Brenda Jones and her husband, Charles Jones of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Johnny B. King and his wife, Evangelist Dr. Cassandra King of Warner Robins, Georgia, Mrs. Rosa M. Howard and her husband, Deacon Benny Howard, and Mr. Tony L. King and his wife, Mrs. Michelle King, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Charles Joyner and his wife, Mrs. Bobby Joyner of Tifton, Georgia. Minister Omar King and his wife, Mrs. Catherine King. Miss Doris Davis and her husband, Mr. Anderson Davis. And Pastor Nita Boston Small, all of New York. Mrs. Noah Hutchinson and her husband, Mr. James Hutchinson of New Jersey. His sisters-in-law, Mrs. Linda Burks of Tifton, Georgia, and Mrs. Mary Perry of Texas. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include his special friends, Miss Cassandra Collins and Mr. Edward Frank Lawson, survived Mr. Chester King, age 53, of 806 South 5th Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Chester King, age 63, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Miss A. Garee Denise Turner of 211 Wall Street, Vienna, Georgia, age 59, died Saturday, December 12th at Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted daughters, Ms. Bianca Fuller and Ms. Brianna Fuller, both of Vienna, Georgia. Her loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Beauty Nell Turner Daniels of Vienna, Georgia. Her beloved sister, Mrs. Aria Oliver and Mrs. Chakra Lewis, both of Vienna, Georgia. Her beloved brother, Mr. Gerald Turner, and his wife, Mrs. Reen Turner of Oceanside, California, and Mr. Demestri Carter of Vienna, Georgia. Two beloved uncles, Mr. John Turner and his wife, Mrs. Linda Turner of College Park, Georgia, and Mr. Roderick Turner and his wife, Mrs. Vanessa Turner of Lithonia, Georgia. A host of other relatives and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. A. Garee Denise Turner, age 59, of 211 Wall Street, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Ms. A. Garee Denise Turner, age 59, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
And now for our announcements. This morning, as we continue with our announcements, we would first like to take this opportunity to thank you for all the announcements that you've sent. We do ask that if you have announcements that you would like for us to share with you on Sunday morning, that you please get them to us by 12 noon on the Saturday before the announcements. Please, you may email them to us at jwmsfh@bellsouth.net, or you're more than welcome to fax them to us at 229-273-5111. And now for our announcements this morning. The New Poplar Spring Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them during their morning worship service at 9:45 a.m. via conference call. You may call 253-993-3761. Again, the New Poplar Spring Baptist Church invites you to worship with them each Sunday morning, 9:45 a.m., Wednesday evening service at 6:45 p.m., and you may call via conference call 253-993-3761. Pastor Johnny Dean is the pastor. You're invited to worship at the Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church. You may reach them via conference call, and their conference call schedule is as follows. Each Sunday morning at 9 o'clock a.m., Tuesday midday prayer at 12 o'clock noon, Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. Conference call number for them is 229-329-7611. Remember that conference call number is 229-329-7611. Mother Lucille Shays is the church mother. Deacon Arthur L. Parker is the chairman of deacons. Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. You're invited to pull up in praise with the Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church each Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. They're located at 1818 U.S. Highway 41 North here in Cordele. Pull up in praise each Sunday morning with the Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church at 10 o'clock a.m. Reverend Gregory Williams is the pastor. The Cordele Crisp Area Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance invite you to join them in an hour of prayer each Sunday for our nation, as well as against our fight against COVID-19 pandemic. This is held each Sunday evening at 6 o'clock p.m. via conference call. The conference call number is 657-390-4570. The Cordele Crisp Area Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, an hour of prayer for our nation and our fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. You're invited to join them for this hour of prayer each Sunday evening at 6 o'clock p.m. The Crisp County chapter of the NAACP will have its regular scheduled meeting this evening at 4 o'clock p.m. at Blackshear Place. All interested persons, those interested in becoming a member, are asked to please come and join this afternoon at 4 o'clock p.m. at Blackshear Place, located at 1001 Blackshear Road here in Cordele. And we remind you that your annual membership to join is $30. This is a very worthwhile event, and we invite you to come and be a part of our local chapter of the NAACP. Dr. Ruby Jackson is the secretary. Reverend Isaac H. Owens is the branch president. In other community announcements that we have, the St. King Missionary Baptist Church, located at 108 East 17th Avenue, invites you to worship with them each first and third Sunday at 8 o'clock a.m., an hour of prayer worship at 9 o'clock a.m., and Sunday school and worship service will begin at 10:15 a.m. They do not have worship service on the fifth Sunday. Reverend Woody C. Burnham is the pastor. Reverend Joyce Daniels is the co-pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church invites you to their conference call schedule, which is each Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m., prayer on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon, and Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The conference call for the Mount Zion First African Baptist Church is 515-604-9765. Access code is 28818. 2880. Again, that number is 515-604-9765, and the access code is 288180. Deacon Joe Wedges is the chairman of deacons. Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. The Camp Creek Missionary Baptist Church of Unadilla invites you to their annual Friends and Family Day service, which will be held today, Sunday, December 13th at 10 o'clock a.m. Reverend Roosevelt McWilliams will be the guest speaker. This is a drive-in service, and they will adhere to the guidelines provided by the CDC. Again, you're invited to worship at the Camp Creek Baptist Church of Unadilla in their annual Friends and Family Day service, which will be held today, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Reverend Roosevelt McWilliams is the guest speaker. As we continue this morning with our announcements, we would like to remind you that early voting for our upcoming Senate race in the state of Georgia will begin on December 14th. December 14th is the date that early voting will begin. We encourage you to take this opportunity to get out and vote. Early voting begins on December 14th here in Crisp County. And remember, early voting is from December 14th until December 31st. This is a chance for us to make a historic vote in this election coming up. So please take the opportunity to remember to get out and vote beginning on December 14th through December 31st for early voting. And the day of the election is January the 5th, and polls will be open at 7 o'clock a.m. So you're invited to take this opportunity to go back to the polls and exercise your right to vote. That concludes our announcements for this morning, and now for our dedications this morning. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to those who have sent in dedications, and our dedication this morning is dedicated in loving memory of Mrs. Annie C. Telfair Hollis, who departed this life on December 4th, 2018. Dedication is requested by her children, Vivian Telfair, Alicia and Herman Williams, Chief Augusta Telfair and his wife Ethel, and the entire family, as we pause to remember the life of our beloved Mrs. Annie C. Telfair Hollis, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Ethel Lee Lucas Killings, also in loving memory of Mrs. Rosie Mae Hudson, Mr. Jesse James Killings, Mr. Roosevelt Lucas Killings, Mr. Arthur Eugene Killings, and Mr. Jesse White. Dedication requested by Ms. Diane White Malachi, Ms. Verdell Jenwright, and Mr. Arthur James Killing, as they pause at this time to remember the life and the works of their loved ones who are gone but never to be forgotten. Selection is dedicated in loving memory of Mr. Alton Jordan, who departed this life November 27th, 2000. Dedication requested by his wife, Mrs. Annie Ruth Jordan, and the entire Jordan family. In loving memory of Miss Justine Vance, who would have celebrated her birthday December the 1st. Dedication requested by the Vance and Ford families. Precious memories linger still. In loving memory of Mrs. Mary Fagan Thomas, who departed this life December 3rd, 2017. Dedication requested by her children, Mr. Clifford Thomas and Mr. Alvin Thomas, her grandchildren, Miss Victoria Davis, Onemian Thomas, and A.J. Thomas, her great-grandchildren, Cassidy Felton, Tony Love Taylor, her sister, Gail Grant, and Miss Lucy Baker, her brother, Deacon Jimmy Fagan, and the entire Fagan family. Precious memories linger still. In loving memory of Stuart John Lee Clark, our beloved, who departed this life December 3rd, 2010. Dedication requested by his children and all of the members of the Davis Chapel CME Church, where he served so faithfully in his life. We remember him for the many times that he shared his voice with us in our community. In loving memory of Mr. Viotis Davis, who would have celebrated his birthday on December the 6th. Dedication requested by the Davis and Manning families. In loving memory of Mr. Bobby Lee Johnson, who departed this life December 7, 2012. Dedication requested by his mother, Miss Annette Stembridge. As we continue this morning, we'd like to take this opportunity to say happy birthday to Brother Silas Dowdell, who is celebrating his birthday today, Sunday, December 13th. Also, happy birthday to his wife, Mrs. Doretha Dowdell, who will celebrate her birthday on Tuesday, December the 15th. Dedication requested by the entire Dowdell family. Happy birthday to each of you. Happy birthday to Miss Mary Reese, who will celebrate her birthday on Wednesday, December the 16th. Dedication requested by the Reese family. Happy birthday to Miss Sharon Butts, who will celebrate her birthday on Wednesday, December the 16th. Dedication requested by the entire family. Would also like to take this opportunity to say happy birthday to Brother Dravian McGill, who celebrated his birthday on Friday, November 27th. Dedication requested by his wife, his children, his mother, the McGill, and royal families. Happy birthday to Miss Rakitha McGill, who celebrated her birthday on November 28th. Dedication requested by her parents, her sister, and the entire McGill family. Also, happy birthday to Mr. Edward Earl McGill, who celebrated his birthday on November 30th. Dedication requested by his daughter, grandson, his mother, and the entire McGill family. Happy birthday to Miss Della Westbrook, who will celebrate her birthday, or who celebrates her birthday on November the 30th. Dedication requested by her children, grandchildren, and the entire Westbrook family. Happy birthday to twins Angelica and Angelo Jones, who celebrate their birthday on December the 8th. Dedication requested by the Jones family. And a very special happy birthday today goes out to Brother Kelvin Pless of Americus, Georgia, who is celebrating his birthday today. He's encouraging all of his well-wishers to go to his Facebook page and in honor of his birthday to make a donation to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Again, happy birthday to Brother Kelvin Pless, who is celebrating his birthday today. Happy 50th anniversary to Mr. Jerome and Mrs. Barbara Lucas Lane, who celebrate their anniversary on Friday, December the 11th. Dedication requested by their daughter, Jennifer. We'd also like to pause this time to dedicate our program this morning in love and memory of Mr. C.T. Wellens, who departed this life December the 11th. Dedication requested by his daughter, Mother Ida Bell Patrick, and the entire family. In love and memory of Miss Jerusha Holmes, who would have celebrated her birthday on December the 11th. Dedication requested by the Manning and Adams family. In love and memory of Mr. John Lee Colson, who departed this life December 12th. Dedication requested by the Colson and Dennis family. In love and memory of Mr. Albert Kendrick, who departed this life December 13th, 2011. Dedication requested by the Denard, Hardeman, Cobb, and Adams family. In love and memory of Mr. Emmett Billings, who departed this life December 15th. Dedication requested by his wife, Mrs. Janie Billings, and the entire family. In love and memory of Mrs. Odessa Mumphrey, who departed this life December 15th, 1969. Dedication requested by the Mumphrey family. And in love and memory of Mr. Donald Patrick, who would have celebrated his birthday on December the 15th. Dedication requested by his mother, Mother Ida Bell Patrick. We also say happy wedding anniversary to Mr. Johnny and Mrs. Barbara Dennis, who celebrated their wedding anniversary on November the 30th. And happy wedding anniversary to Mr. J.R. and Mrs. Costello Levant, who celebrate their anniversary on December the 4th. And also happy birthday to Sister Costello Levant, who celebrated her birthday on Wednesday, December the 2nd. Dedication is requested by their entire family. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Stanley Jefferson, age 65, of 1555 Northwest 7th Avenue, Miami, Florida, died Thursday, November 26th at his residence in Miami, Florida. The funeral service for Mr. Stanley Jefferson will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Rodriguez Lamar Collins, age 33, of 716 Burton Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, December 5th in Salina, Kansas. The funeral service for Mr. Rodriguez Lamar Collins will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Renowned Beloved gospel soloist, musician, and songwriter, Brother Jack King, age 59, of 619 West 26th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, December 11th at the Westwood Healthcare Rehabilitation Center in Statesboro, Georgia. The funeral service for renowned gospel soloist, musician, and songwriter, Brother Jack King, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Chester King, age 63, of 806 South 5th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, December 11th at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Chester King will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Ms. Glory Denise Turner, age 59, of 211 Wall Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, December 12th at Navicent Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Ms. Glory Denise Turner will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. And now for our final selection this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mrs. Thelma Green of Americus, Georgia. The family of Deaconess Volame Bryant Walker of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Miss Geraldine Janetta Jones of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deaconess Pearlie Merritt Shelton of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Rosa Mae Atkins Stokes of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Doris Ruth Dice Tyson of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Susie Mae Morris Curry, beloved church mother of the Zion Grove Baptist Church, Oakfield, Georgia. The family of Lieutenant Stokely Carmichael Cheese of Perry, Georgia, and Rochelle, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mr. Stanley Jefferson of Miami, Florida, and Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mr. Rodriguez Lamar Collins of Vienna, Georgia. The family of renowned gospel musician, singer, and songwriter, Brother Jack King of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Chester King of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Ms. Glory Denise Turner of Vienna, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-ins, to all of our patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, to our ministers and their spouses and families, to our retired educators, to the men and women serving in the armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all of our veterans, to all of our educators, and to each of you who tune in and watch our program each and every Sunday morning. It is a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program this morning in its entirety is dedicated in loving memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. We also take this opportunity to dedicate our program this morning to Reverend and Mrs. A.L. Johnson and their family this morning. And to each of you who have tuned in, we pray God's blessings upon each of you. We pray that you will have a wonderful week. Our final selection this morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
Some of these days, well,